Greetings, folks. Iolair here to talk about my impressions of Submarines coming to World of Warships and to offer my perspective on responding to major changes to the game. Thanks to Sky Tank Dog for his inquiry to me seeking my input on this topic, so I thought to share with the community. The match in the background is myself sailing the Tier 6 Soviet light cruiser, the Budyonny. I am bottom tier in a Tier 8 battle with double carriers, but as you'll see, that won't be too much of an issue. To get right to the chase, I'm quite excited about seeing submarines in the game. I feel that submarines can add new dimensions of interest and fun, but this is going to come with some risks, namely expanded complexity, which I'll touch on later, as well as perceptions of imbalance. Now, what excites me is to see how I can influence a game while playing submarines, and I want to know how existing classes that I like to play today, especially cruisers and destroyers, will be able to counter submarines. Now, I do think it will take a while for wargaming to make adjustments to establish even some initial balance. And even after submarines are released to the public initially, wargaming will continue to make further adjustments as players learn to exploit strengths of submarines and they struggle with their limitations. And the players will also exploit countermeasures to submarines. And it's impossible for wargaming, even after some closed beta testing and maybe even public testing, to really work out all of the nuances and influences of how submarines are played and played against to really strike a good balance. Now, while I know wargaming historically was emphatic that submarines would never come to the game, the reality is that they run an entertainment business, and I see it's their prerogative to introduce any changes they want if they think the changes would benefit or increase the attraction and longevity of the game. And wargaming needs to continually look at how to keep the game relevant and fresh to attract new players. And if I were in wargaming's position, that's what I'm continually thinking about. Now, wargaming know that some in the existing player base have disliked this change or the announcement of this change, and we've seen similar reactions to announcements regarding the carrier gameplay, firing from smoke, stealth firing, among a variety of other changes. And so it's unsurprising that some in the community have responded quite negatively to the announcement of submarines. Many detractors are decrying the game and its developers, immediately claiming the new class would be bad for the game. And in my view, claims of imbalance or negative impacts from the presence of submarines are frankly wildly premature. And until August 21st, the public had not even seen how the gameplay would work, so no one could really offer any credible input on the topic. And even today, after the demonstration of the summary gameplay was offered to the public, there's still a lot of negative feedback, but again, it's still very early in the process and lots of changes are coming. And I'll touch on the demonstration here a little more shortly. As I said earlier, like I said, there will be many changes, both before the public can play with submarines in general, as well as after the release. So I don't have any particular anxiety that while there may be some imbalances one way or the other, that things will sort of even out eventually. Now, I do expect that some portion of the community will later feel vindicated when they see early reactions from players whose games were ended early due to submarines. And right now I tend to ignore such reactions. Most of that commentary to me most of the negative commentary strikes me as, quote, noise, because people are venting their frustrations as they're learning these changes. But unfortunately, many of them don't offer objective input. I think it's okay to be negative and about the changes, but I think it's more useful to offer constructive feedback on what could be changed and how and why to make the game more enjoyable. But just sort of general ranting about I dislike this or you dislike some sort of change to me is not very constructive. As I mentioned, at the time I was preparing the commentary for this video in mid-August, Wargaming streamed previews of submarine gameplay from the 2019 Gamescom convention taking place in Germany. I'll leave a link to the stream recording involving the submarine gameplay demonstration in the description below. I think Wargaming did a really good job demonstrating the key mechanics of the gameplay and their thoughts behind the implementation, talking about the strengths and weaknesses of the class. And I personally appreciate that Wargaming is sharing this content early. It shows some transparency to the playing community and some trust to accept objective, well-expressed feedback. And there's no doubt that submarines will be an incredible threat to surface ships. But as with all new ships and mechanics, it will take a while for players to master both the gameplay and their associated countermeasures. So again, balance will eventually come. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I'm also very excited to see the role of different classes in their countermeasures against submarines, especially cruisers and destroyers. In the demonstration of submarine gameplay, destroyers are able to drop depth charges and damage and sink submarines. It was unclear to me, however, whether the timing and location of dropping of depth charges would be explicitly controlled by the player or would be somehow automated. I'm thinking it's going to need to have some trigger mechanism, whether that's a key like a consumable button that you press to launch the depth charges, but you may not have any sort of direct control over, how deep those depth charges go off. I don't think that Wargaming wants to get into a lot of the nuances around the depths of submarines. Finally, I think it will be very interesting to see the character of each nation's submarine playstyle and their unique abilities. There was some mention of the different nations' characteristics in the demonstration, but there wasn't a lot of detail behind this, and I think that a lot of that is probably still being thought through and will develop, and we'll see more content come out about that. I do, however, want to cover what I feel is a genuine risk to the game, and that is increased complexity. Warships is very rich with mechanics, and it requires in-depth and often nuanced knowledge to be effective in the game. Because of even the existing complexity in the game, new players are often very confused about what is going on, and many players, even after playing thousands of games, still lack knowledge in or misunderstand basic mechanics, including things like armor penetration and concealment and so on. And so a game of high complexity is often a turnoff for many players who want a simpler arcade-like experience. So while submarines may be enticing to some, including veteran and skilled players, their presence may very well be discouraging to those learning the game or to those who want a more predictable experience in the game. Now, frankly, I do think that this increased complexity is at the heart of the anxiety for many players. It's much like the carrier rework and the presence of carriers and matches. And like I said, the greater complexity detracts from a more arcade-like and predictable game experience. And I do think that is a legitimate factor for many players' enjoyment of the game, and I think that's completely valid. Now, on the other hand, some players, like I said, will relish the challenge of the increased game sophistication, so the question will really come down to whether the addition of submarines will be appealing enough to broaden the overall player base, and we shall see. In the end, I personally welcome the new dimension of play, and I look forward to offering input and hopefully guidance on playing in and against submarines. I do invite you to share your thoughts on the topic in the comments below, and I read all comments and reply to many, so I welcome the dialogue with you. And with that, thanks for watching. We hope to see you out there, and we wish you happy sailing.